Okay, Ms. Mitchell, I've asked you to unmute.
Hi, good evening. Thank you, Commissioner Finley. My name is Catherine Mitchell. I'm the director of the Brooks, which is the short-term family housing facility on Idaho Avenue. I just wanted to come back to this meeting to provide updates about the community block party event that is coming up 2 weeks from tomorrow. I'm sorry, 1 week from tomorrow. So Tuesday, June 29th from 4 to 7 p.m. It's going to take place in between the Brooks, which is at 3318 Idaho Avenue, and the police station next door, 3320 Idaho Avenue Northwest. It's for the entire community, so folks are welcome to come out. We're going to have, I think, a moon bounce thanks to Councilmember Che's office, and fun and food and activities for the community. It's not just for residents of the Brooks, it's for everyone. So we hope you join us. And I'm going to attempt to put the flyer in the chat, but the flyer has been circulating the local area listserv, so feel free to spread the word. And if you have any questions, please reach out to us at Friendship Place. We'd love to see you there. And thank you, Commander Bedley, and I see you on here for MPD's help in putting this on. We're looking forward to it.
Thank you. And now we'll move to an announcement from Commander Bedlian regarding the incident last week at Eaton. Commander Bedlian, I'm going to hope you're unmuted. Great. So thank you.
Good evening, Commissioner Finley, and good evening to the rest of the ANC commissioners. Thank you for having me. And I'm grateful for the opportunity to share in greater detail about what occurred on Thursday afternoon, right around 2 p.m., just before 2 p.m. So as many of you saw in the news, there was a shooting at Eaton Elementary, 3200 block of 34th Street Northwest. As you all probably know, it's under construction, and there were over 100 construction workers on site when this occurred. And what basically happened was officers were doing their job and being thorough. They heard what sounded like gunfire coming from 34th Street, and they did what officers are trained to do. They went towards the gunfire. They observed one adult male firing with what we call a long rifle or an assault rifle. And they saw another male firing a smaller gun, a handgun, in the direction of the construction site. We later learned that 2 adult victims were hit. One of them had significant injuries to their lower extremities, and there was another adult victim also struck, but we're not sure if that was from glass. It was a relatively minor injury. But nonetheless, two victims hurt and over 100 traumatized, as you may have seen in the news interviews. So our officers, once they saw this, they did not stop. They initiated their emergency equipment, their lights and sirens. They pursued the suspects, and they did so safely. They did not get in an accident. We're very grateful for their good work in doing that. And then they pursued the suspect vehicle all the way to Ward 7, which is the 6th Police District near 46th Street and Chaplain Road Southeast. It's an area I used to police when I was an officer. And the car that the suspects were in crashed. Thankfully, 3 people gave up relatively quickly, and 1 person ran a short distance, but all 4 suspects were caught. And then during the pursuit, guns were discarded, and a total of 4 guns were all recovered by another 2D officer. Just really outstanding police work. The press release I put in the chat for greater details on the names and the charges, but I can tell you that there were well over a dozen of gun charges among the suspects involved in this case. So very frightening to see the level of gun violence that individuals will perpetrate in our city, and to know that they can be charged multiple times and are repeatedly released into the community, just very concerning. So I'm very grateful for those officers. We're going to be acknowledging them most likely in our CAC Awards banquet in September, and then we're doing some things on a smaller scale as well. But their work was just truly remarkable, and so grateful that they were able to catch all these bad guys. And it looks like our victim has since been okay. But obviously multiple people traumatized, to include the neighborhood and the construction workers that were on site. And I'm happy to answer any questions about that if there are any.
Thank you, Commander. I think I'll turn this over to Commissioner McWood. Commissioner McWood, do you have any questions for the Commander?
Actually, I want to thank the Commander. This was a very frightening incident. there were a lot of residents who were at home at the time and saw this unfold. And it's reverberated in the community since. I was actually in that area 2 days before with a large group of residents and some officials from the Department of Health. So it was only 2 days removed from when this occurred. So, and of course, no one was anticipating that anything like this would happen. I want to make one additional comment, which, and then ask the commander a question. What this brings home, I think, to everyone is how many guns are in the city and how many illegal guns are in the city and what that permits people to do. And everyone, of course, is potentially a victim when we have that type of a situation in the city. So I wanted to ask you whether there are any new initiatives. I know the police are being very aggressive about trying to take illegal guns out of the community, but I wanted to ask if there's any update on that. The other thing I wanted to ask you is there are an awful lot of rumors circulating in the neighborhood about whether this shooting occurred with the shooter standing on the street or whether the shooter was on the property or even in the building. And the other part of that question is, do you have any idea about motive?
Yes, so those are great questions. Thank you for asking them. I'll touch base on the first one about our efforts to seize illegal firearms. So Chief Conti, as he spoke about throughout some of his confirmation testimony and additional testimony recently, one of the first tasks he implemented with reformulating some of our units was to revamp the gun recovery unit. And some tactics were implemented where we were focusing, as he would say, getting the right guns out of the wrong hands. And that's the main focus. We want to get the guns that are going to be used in violent crime out of those people's hands that are going to use them. So obviously Thursday, we know that's the case. We know 4 people brazenly felt comfortable going to a neighborhood where there's an elementary school, where the National Cathedral is a few blocks away, and fire a handgun and a long assault rifle. So we're grateful that we got those guns out of there. One of those individuals was had another open firearm case that was pending. He was also charged for that secondary case after we arrested him for the shooting. So to me, that tells me we're making the right efforts to identify the right people. And as far as the motive, so the motive is a very challenging thing to determine in criminal investigations, particularly this early on. So we're going to go through the court process. Right now, those cases have been papered by the United States Attorney's Office, and all 4 suspects are currently held, which we're very grateful for. That means they're not on the street right now. And we're grateful that they can't be in a position to inflict further harm. That is not always the case in the District of Columbia. There are many people that are arrested for firearms offenses, to include murder, and are released. So we're grateful that they're held. But what we do believe at this time, again, it's very preliminary, is we believe that one of the victims was the intended target. And we believe that it is in response to ongoing disputes between essentially rival gangs or neighborhoods. Now, one of the things that is incredibly alarming for me as your district commander is, of the rival neighborhoods, they were nowhere near Cleveland Park or Cathedral Heights, not anywhere near there. But you had 4 individuals coming to a work site to inflict gun violence. And I honestly, I've lived in the district for 22 years. I can't recall anything like this in Cathedral Heights, in Cleveland Park, in Friendship Heights, anywhere downtown. I just cannot recall anything like this. So to me, it just speaks to the level of emboldenment that some of our gun violent offenders are receiving from some individuals in our city. And I think we got to speak up and say this is not acceptable, and that's where you all come in. It's so great. So I would encourage you all just to continue to be engaged on this issue, especially as we're in budget season. As you may recall, last year, Councilmember Allen spearheaded a strong effort to reduce our funding, and we're down 200 police members right now. I don't think it's a coincidence that our violent crime is up in the city. So as we're going through this next process, we will not be able to get back to 3,800 for the next coming years. It simply won't happen because we were forced to stop hiring. But at the very least, we need to stay where we are, and we need to start hiring again because our members are retiring. So I feel very passionate about this. I'm a father of 3 living in Ward 5. I lived and worked in the District of Columbia my entire adult life, and it requires collaboration with not just the police, but with you, the community members who care deeply about these issues. And then I didn't answer your last question about where they were standing. So we know that they were in the street at one point. Some of the evidence indicates that they may have slightly gone on to the construction site, but that's still unknown.
Thank you, Commander.
You're welcome.
Thank you very much. And thank you for sharing that press release as well, Commander.
You're welcome.
So folks, is there anybody else who in the community who has any issues they would like to raise that are not otherwise on the agenda? Please use the raise hand feature in Zoom, and you'll find the raise hand feature down along the bottom under, I believe, reactions. Okay, seeing none, moving on. The consent calendar was amended and adopted as part of the approval of the agenda. And now we move on to commission business. And so Commissioner McWood, this is your presentation, and so or your folks. So I'd appreciate if you could introduce them and introduce the affordable housing proposal at Wardman Park.
I would be happy to. And let me say, first of all, I always have my video on. I've been in Zoom meetings all day, and it was working fine. And now it's not, which probably means I left the video on at some other meeting. So I apologize for that. But thank you for the opportunity to introduce this presentation. I've been working with a group in Ward 3. They came together about 8 months ago with the mission of trying to aggressively stimulate affordable housing in Ward 3. We've been working with a citywide group that has the same mission on a citywide level. So as we were working on this, of course, the Wardman Marriott Hotel closed. It remained vacant. It was announced that it was in bankruptcy and eventually that it was going to be sold. As we explored this property, because obviously it was unique and something that got everyone's attention, we started to talk to officials both in DC, nonprofit groups, for-profit developers, financial people, architects, one of whom is going to present tonight. And our sort of aspirational ideas started to take shape and be affirmed by people who had more expertise that this was actually a project that could happen. So we are trying to let people know what we've been doing, what we think how we think the project could be re-envisioned, what it might do for Ward 3 and for the city generally, and specifically, of course, for the Woodley Park community that is right there. So I will let others really talk in more detail about the project. The first person that I'd like to introduce is Phil Esikoff, who's a very well-known architect in Washington, has done a lot of multifamily award-winning buildings in the city. He lives in our ANC, and he very graciously has been offering us pro bono consultant services. And he and two lawyers in New York City have been collaborating on this project. And I think the illustrations that he is going to show you will help to sort of form the vision, give some reality to the vision that we're talking about. So I will go ahead and introduce Mr. Eskoff.
Hi, well, I'm sorry, I'm Nancy. Margaret Lenzner was going to speak.
Oh, okay. Let me let Mr. Eskoff is going to speak second. The first person who's going to introduce the entire project is Margaret Lenzner, who actually lives in my SMD, is a longtime ANC3C resident, and is part of the Ward 3 Housing Justice Group. Margaret, apologize for skipping you.
Thank you, Nancy. Thank you, commissioners, for this opportunity to describe our goal for the Wardman site. The Ward 3 Housing Justice, as Nancy said, was formed by a few Ward 3 women who met in a chat on an Empower DC virtual meeting. Our advocacy for affordable housing at the site overlaps with that of the Wardman Hotel Strategy Team. Jamie Epstein and I are active members of both. We are urging the DC government to acquire the 16-acre hotel property for conversion to 100% affordable housing for low-income residents with a range of incomes. Converting the hotel can provide quality homes for individuals, seniors, and families, including those with very low incomes, in a well-resourced, transit-rich city. The need for affordable housing is unquestionable. More than 40,000 DC residents are on waiting lists for subsidized housing. Gentrification has displaced countless long-term residents. Inclusionary zoning produced only 1,100 units citywide over the last 10 years. Those units have gone to tenants with 60 to 80% median family income, while the greatest need is housing for residents with incomes less than 50% MFI. Mayor Bowser's goal of 1,990 new affordable units in Ward 3 cannot be realized by for-profit development with inclusionary zoning. Even if developers set aside 20% of residential space in new Ward 3 apartment buildings, that would require almost 10,000 units to meet the mayor's goal. There is not enough available land for that. Converting the Wardman Hotel building to housing can provide 1/4 of the mayor's goal for Ward 3 in less time at less cost than new construction, and with existing infrastructure suitable for configuring the 1,159 guest rooms to become up to 500 apartments, from studios to 4 bedrooms. Conversion would avoid disruptive demolition and reconstruction. Adaptive reuse would contain the carbon captured in the existing concrete, and adding green roofs would enhance sustainability. The hotel's vast event spaces can be modified for community benefits, such as fitness and sport gyms, food service and other job training, supportive services, children's daycare, classrooms and activity space for nearby Oyster School, meeting and conference rooms, and even a small grocery store like Trader Joe's. There's ample garage parking, and the expansive green space in front of the hotel on Woodley Road would be preserved for community use and enjoyment. We have met with nonprofit developers and other housing advocates. We've talked with and gained support from local community residents. Our outreach to DC officials has garnered significant interest. Council member McDuffie requested $140 million for the purchase. Several local news outlets have broadcast segments about this idea. We hope ANC3C will support our vision for 100% affordable housing through city purchase of the Wardman Hotel. Now, Phil Eskoff, our consulting architect, is ready to show slides that illustrate the potential for the apartments and activity spaces at the property. Though I think it'd be great if you could allow Jamie Epstein to share her screen because she's got the slides that Phil will talk about.
Thank you, Margaret. I believe Jamie has that. Yep, she has the power.
Great.
Oh, Margaret, you're on mute.
Phil should unmute.
Unmute. Okay. Good. Well, there's a picture of the Taft Bridge, which connects most of downtown across the Rock Creek Park to what we know is that hub at Calvert and Connecticut. Next. And of course, this is a perfect transit-oriented, walkable urban environment. There's the hotel outlined in yellow. I'm sure everybody who's on the call today knows the site very well. On the lower left, you can see the Shoreham, and there's Connecticut Avenue headed off to the upper right. And you can see the Wardman there with the dotted yellow line around it. And what's notable is that it's surrounded on all sides by medium and high-rise buildings, medium meaning 65, and then some 90-foot buildings. Next. And we looked at the footprint of the building. That's a darker pink, which is where the tower is. And then the lighter pink are the lower levels that then descend down about 60 feet, changing grade, to Calvert Street. So there's actually a substantial building there where the rental car used to be, next to the Barton. And then there's the service drive that goes up to the Woodley. And then the green space with the little oval in the center. So that's just to orient you. The historic Wardman is the plus sign in the upper right, the X there. Next. And here's the picture of the building. It's done around, completed just before 1980. And you can see in upper right, you can see the east entrance, which is where some of the buses come. That's what you see if you come out of the Metro canopy and look to the west. Then there's the main drop off to Port Cochere. And you'll see that blank wall. That's where you'll see later on we were proposing to add a small wing there to complete the entry gesture of the building in the way that the historic building has its sort of X sort of recessed entrance. Next. So this is the site and massing strategy. So yeah. So there's the building outlined in yellow. You see the Port Cochere there, and you can see the newer rental building on the right. And then you see that low lobby area. That's the Western Ballroom. And when we looked at the plans, there's actually the ability to plug another wing into that blank wall in the middle of that big diagonal facade of the historic building. But there's also the ability to add another peninsula next, going out towards the Calvert. So what this is just saying is that if you measure the thickness of the Woodley apartments, or even the historic building to the left, or a lot of other apartment houses, you see that this building is a little skinny in plan because hotel rooms are just not quite as deep from the corridor going out to the exterior wall. So we felt there was some benefit in deepening the footprint of the building, 8 feet. That's the width of a parking space along the street, not the length, the width of a compact space, actually. Next. And then adding that one wing sort of blocked out in kind of a yellow. And then also adding a third hook, just like you can see the way there's a sort of a courtyard that opens up to the south facing Rock Creek Park. So we could hook onto the building and add another portion on there. That almost doubles the footprint, actually. Next. But you'll notice none of it builds out into the green space. And this is just an illustration of the character of light and shadow that could be gotten by adding to the building, taking off the facade, which I think is a bit insidious, but then also creating bays and balconies, not unlike the building to the right and left, which have these bays and balconies. That's very traditional of Washington's buildings. And then putting a green roof on there, and also collecting all of the exhausts from the kitchens and toilets and dryers, and doing what's called energy recovery, so that we meet the current environmental standards for design in the district, but just as good practice. Next. And so there's opportunity around the site to create places for kids to hang out. These gardens could be on the roof. We've done buildings like that. Park Chelsea down in southeast is a historic, is a new apartment house, but it's got gardens on the roof where people grow all kinds of stuff, legal things. Next. And then within the lower portions of the building, we could have areas for a small grocery. If any of you know the new building across from Eastern Market, there's a 14,000 square foot Trader Joe's. That's pretty much a neighborhood grocery people walk to. It doesn't really produce any traffic of significance. But there's also areas there because there's a kitchen where people could be trained in culinary arts. And then along that service drive, there's where the building is closest to the Barton, you could add some additional classroom space and other kind of arts enrichment programmatic areas for the benefit of the Oyster School, but also for the neighborhood. I mean, there could be dance studios, there could be athletic facilities that are not just reserved for the project itself, but for the surrounding community. Maybe there's a library outpost, electronic reading room, so that the third graders from the school could teach the more older citizens in the neighborhood how to use computers, people like me, who refer to this as a slideshow when we don't use slides anymore. Next. And so this, if you can make out that cross X plan. So on the lower part of the screen there is Calvert, and along the left side is that group of gray classrooms. Just shows you how many classrooms you could put in there. And then we put in a basketball court and a black box theater and a dance studio, just to give you a sense of scale, but also some teaching kitchens, meeting space, job training facilities, and perhaps a small grocery store, sort of a neighborhood grocery store. Next. And then so we looked at the interiors of the building, trying to see, could we change this to housing, whether it was market rate or not. You'll see in a moment that the footprint of the building, here you have the existing tower footprint, has lots and lots of bathrooms, and they're at a rhythm, and the rooms are at a rhythm that is very similar and amenable to being reused as residential. I worked on a committee, this is a joint committee with DCB, Building Industry Association, Office of Planning, the Downtown Bid, to analyze converting office buildings to residential. And what they discovered was it's very uneconomic in that you essentially have to demolish the building and rebuild it. And it would take all kinds of subsidies to build housing downtown, recycling office buildings in most cases. It doesn't mean that it can't be done, but it's not as convenient as if you have a footprint of a building next where you can see, here's a blow up of just a section of it. You can see those long gray rectangles that flank the corridor where the red triangles are. Well, those are built in, already structured shafts for plumbing and ductwork. That's not typical of an office building, which has none of that. It has a 20 by 20 foot grid, post-tension concrete. This has columns and these shafts at a rhythm that is very similar in terms of syncopation to what you'd have in an apartment building. A lot of times sometimes you'll find them 24 feet. You might have them even at 27 or 28 feet. And this is similar to what this building is, but it is a bit shallow. So next. So one thing you'll notice in this scheme is that there's sort of a double line around the perimeter. That's that area for, let's just say, sculptural enrichment of the building, but also making the building more efficient as apartments. And you'll see this little note here. We showed a lot of 2, 3, but also a lot of 4-bedroom apartments and then some studios. And, you know, my experience having done residential buildings in the district for the last, well, 40 years I've been working on residential buildings in the district. I know that over time, and I also lived in a condominium, the Woodward historic building, for 30 years. I know that people would sometimes want to add a room by taking over an apartment next to them, that even people who own buildings might need to reconfigure them over time. So building in some flexibility to compress or expand units to allow people's lives to evolve and have the building follow that evolution, that's a very, to me, a very good way to design a building. Next. And so this just shows, if you look close, you can see those gray rectangles, and you'll notice they're next to kitchens and baths. And then on the perimeter, in sort of a lighter color, you can see there are like solariums or study areas for like a couple of kids. If you look along the top edge there, you'll see two small beds, and then the kids can go out there. They have like a little study porch. And then on the right-hand side, maybe that's grandparents or uncles or aunts, or, you know, a relative who wants to be close enough to do some babysitting, maybe, but not so much that they don't have a little bit of privacy of their own. And, you know, I don't want to go through each one of these, but you get the idea. But that also allows you to create some nice light and shadow effects, like you see on the truly historic building that has the, you know, cupola on top, the historic Wardman, and then also in the new rental building to the west of the property. I think that's it. Hand it back to Jamie and friends.
Thank you, Philip.
You're welcome.
Jamie, is there more to the presentation? Or
Oh, wait, I want to correct one thing that Nancy McWood said. There were 2 lawyers helping us in New York. They're actually 2 young architects. One of them who grew up in the same apartment I lived in all those years. Our son, Jake, is an architect, and his buddy, Henry.
Thanks, Phil. I just wanted to thank you again, all the Bo and all the commissioners, for inviting us tonight to share this vision. And I also am going to be putting into the chat a petition that we have to urge the city to acquire the Wardman for affordable housing. That anyone who's on tonight that would like to sign that, we'd really appreciate it. And I'll also put my email in the chat in case anyone has any questions they'd like to send along.
Thank you. Commissioner McWood, do you have anything more to add before we turn it over to questions for commissioners?
No, we're more than happy to answer questions now or in the future. And I think I will leave it at that.
Great. Okay. Is there anybody, any commissioners, first of all, who have any questions? All commissioners are co-hosts, so you just have to unmute if you have a question. I'll give you all a couple seconds. All right. Are there any members of the public who would like to ask a question of the presenters this evening? If so, please click reactions and choose raise hand, and then we'll call on you and ask you to unmute yourself. Okay, seeing no questions. Thank you very much for the presentation. That was really great and educational. And now we move on to a presentation from the Defund Metropolitan Police Department Coalition on the DC Police Commission Reform Report. Commissioner Siddiqui, would you care to introduce this?
Sure. So I think everyone knows it's been over a year since Mr. George Floyd was murdered. And communities all over the United States and the world responded to that by saying that there was change that was needed. Our own commission actually passed a resolution with that regard. And so that resolution was actually passed a year ago, and maybe we're about 5 days away from the year from when it was signed. And from that resolution, we stated a lot of things that we would like to see from a police reform commission. That commission was established. That commission now has a report. And I'm very excited that Rachel Wilder and Amara Crooms are here today to present the context of what some of that report was and talk a little bit about their coalition as well. So I won't speak too much. And Commissioner Finley, I have their presentation, so I can share my screen and present, but maybe we can unmute them and then I can just move the slides if that's okay.
Sure thing.
Thank you. Thank you. Hello all, my name is Amara Crooms. I am an organizer with Metro DC's Democratic Socialists of America and a member of the steering committee for the Defund the Police Coalition. Rachel, would you like to take a moment to introduce yourself?
Yeah, so I'm Rachel. I live here in Woodley Park, and I also recently became involved with the Defund MPD Coalition through Metro DC DSA.
Awesome. So I want to start by just thanking y'all for your time and for giving us the space to speak tonight. I'd invite everybody to listen with an open mind and to recognize our hopefully common goal of creating a safe and equitable community. You know, over the years of conducting this work, you know, I never cease to be amazed at how consistently people share that vision and yet perceive really deeply different means of how to get there, and even very different visions on what it means for the community to treat each other equally. I'd add that over this past year, we've had some great and often fiery discussions about language. Much of that discussion has been fueled by challenges in media, by challenges, you know, and just the realities of living close on top of one another. And, you know, I want to note that so much of that narrative is fueled by a media that revels in taking us apart, a media that is built upon preservation of the status quo, and one that's really skilled at turning a blind eye to the inequities that govern us, save when they are most convenient to exploit. So I'd like to ask that as we all talk, we listen to one another tonight, and we speak to each other rather than, you know, to pre-existing narratives and stereotypes. So all that being said, let's dive on in. Next slide, please. So I thought I would start by noting who we are. The Defund MPD Coalition is a Black-led, multiracial, working-class coalition of people and organizations brought together by a shared vision of the future. We envision a future in which the public has what it needs, you know, a future in which people are safe, a future in which safety is focused on supporting and strengthening our communities, a future where justice is rooted in harm reduction and prevention rather than police and prisons. The people who compose our coalition come from different parts across the city. You can find us across all 8 wards, organizing and speaking in fora like this or advocating in the streets. You know, these folk come from different lines of life, all rooted in a shared understanding that the status quo is not okay. A shared understanding that things need to change, a shared understanding that we need a fundamental transformation in how we create public safety. And we all share an ardent desire and commitment to fight for that change. The coalition is composed of 29 local community organizations and counting, organizations spanning Black Lives Matter DC, the Working Families Party, DC Justice Lab, the Stop Police Terror Project, and so many more. Next slide, please. So we aren't discussing these in detail today, but on your screen, you'll note these are our high-level demands. These are the demands that drive our vision toward safety. Fundamentally, we want MPD's budget to be cut by 50% in 3 years, and for those funds to be invested in community services. I want to note that we're highlighting these demands because it's essential that we highlight where we're coming from in this conversation. This is what we would envision and what we would advocate for publicly. And I want to be really clear that this is actually not what we're here to talk about tonight. I'll provide a full roadmap and other resources to clarify our coalition's demands later on. But really tonight, we're speaking from a place of compromise and a place of hopefully mutual understanding and advocacy to help us all move forward. Next slide, please. We also wanted to highlight the past positive efforts of this ANC. Last year, in response to the murder of George Floyd and the movement last summer, this ANC passed a resolution calling for a commission to investigate MPD's practices and procedures and to make recommendations. The resolution affirmed that police violence and racism require action, and it recognized that it would be useful to transfer funds from MPD to social services. So kudos to all of y'all for joining us essentially in that fight last year. Bravo. Next slide, please. In July 2020, the DC Police Reform Commission was established by the DC Council, perhaps in response to the advocacy of yourselves and thousands of people across the city like you. In many ways, this fulfilled the goal of your ANC's resolution last year. The commission includes 20 members from a variety of backgrounds with expertise on these issues, and they released their report just in April. Given this ANC's previous support for a commission, we wanted to draw your attention to the specific recommendations from this report that we're asking you to support. These recommendations, to be very clear, do not reflect the aims of our coalition or our roadmap. Instead, they're rooted in moderate and responsive calls for reform and positive change. In many areas, our vision, the Defund MPD coalition, our vision goes quite a bit further. But today, again, we're here in the spirit of compromise. The PRC still envisions a limited role for police. We do not. While Defund MPD is looking to create a world where we don't need them anymore. So ultimately, today, we're here to advocate for this body to support the commission's recommendations. This would not be, again, what we traditionally demand, but we agree that it's a step in the right direction, and that's worth something. And now I'd like to hand the mic over to my co-organizer, Rachel, to go over some of the specifics.
Yeah, thanks so much, Amara. Can move to the next slide. So I just want to start by touching on that the PRC report is very extensive. It's about 250 pages long and includes several, like 8 high-level recommendations and a lot of sub-recommendations under that. So the next few minutes, I'm not going to try to be comprehensive in going over all of those recommendations that we're asking you to support today, but just pulling out some of the high-level, section-level recommendations and highlighting a couple of the sub-recommendations or the details to that. So first, I guess want to start by noting that MPD's budget is a lot larger than anything that DC spends on social services like housing or education. And we actually have the highest amount of police per capita of anywhere in the US, and it's possible anywhere in the world. So sort of taking a step back, it's clear that that investment in policing hasn't translated into safety. DC is not the safest city in the world. Those things are not, correlated. So even though, so it's the Defund MPD coalition, we're asking for a really steep cut in funds to MPD. The PRC is still recognizing that there's a need for a realignment. So they're asking for a decrease by at least the rate of attrition over the next 5 years, and things like putting a cap on overtime. Move to the next slide. Thanks. So these next couple of recommendations, I think, get to the heart of what we in the Defund movement see as safety. So I think you've probably heard commentary that suggests otherwise, but it's actually true that we're not naive. We don't, it's not that we don't believe that interpersonal violence exists. We affirm that it does, and we share the goal of working to end that. We just have different solutions and more effective solutions that we're proposing for doing that. So this is one of those examples. Defund MPD is looking to entirely transition away from police as first responders, recognizing that in most cases, 911 calls, just simply, there's no reason for there to be an armed response, and police often cause harm rather than helping. So the PRC is recognizing that and suggesting that in most cases involving individuals in crisis calling 911, we shift that to a non-police response, a behavioral health care emergency response that are the first responders. And at the same time, in a very limited capacity, they do envision a place for police co-response in cases where individuals pose immediate harm to others. Can move to the next slide. So then again, addressing this idea of safety, I think if you think about what makes a safe community, to me, like, I don't equate safety with police presence. I equate safety with a community where everyone has their basic needs met, they're able to lead healthy lives, dignified lives. And that really gets to the heart of preventing violence before it happens, or addressing the root causes of violence. And if you think about it, that's just something that police are simply not prepared to. They don't have the tools to do that. Like, police are not violence preventers. They just respond to incidents of violence after they happen. So this is, I think, a really essential idea behind the defund movement, and it's reflected here in the PRC report, that what we're looking for is refunding or shifting resources away from police and into community services. And examples of that are healthcare, affordable housing. Can move to the next slide. This point, I think, is fairly straightforward or self-explanatory, and this is a point where the PRC and Defund MPD coalition align almost exactly in that we agree that there is no place for police in schools. Having police in schools just serves to accelerate the school to prison pipeline. We're criminalizing children instead of meeting their needs. And so what we're supporting, and what the PRC also supports, is ending the $23 million that DC spends on police in schools, and instead investing that in services like trauma-informed behavioral health programs for youth. Can move to the next slide. So here in this is Police District 2, which covers most of this ANC. It's the case that even though we have a 7.5% Black population, 64.5% of non-traffic stops are of Black people. And I think that's just a really sort of stark statistic that shows how policing is frequently a racist and harmful tool that serves to harm marginalized people in our own community. This is, non-traffic stops are referring to things like you might notice jump outs or stop and frisk. They're actually often technically illegal stops that are violent tools. And so the Police Reform Commission is calling for the end of these practices, and many of which are also reflected in the Defund MPD roadmap. Can move to the next slide. And so this is the final sort of high level recommendation. I think hopefully we can all agree that when police commit abuses, they should be held accountable, and they're often not. And one of the reasons for that is this legal doctrine of qualified immunity that makes it really, really difficult for police to legally be held liable for abuses that they commit. So the PRC is proposing the end of qualified immunity, as well as a host of other recommendations on increasing transparency and handling complaints against police. So we're asking you to support those as well. All right, yep. And so I'm going to end here for now and leave time for questions. But you can see here, and I'll put in the chat, links to our website where you can read more about the Defund MPD Coalition, as well as the full PRC report, which goes into a lot of detail about all of the points mentioned. And yeah, I would love to invite your questions.
Well, thank you, Ms. Wildburn and Mr. Crooms. Commissioner Siddiqui, do you want to lead off any questions?
Sure. I want to thank you both again, and I know how hard it is for advocates to speak in terms of compromise, so I appreciate that as well. I would want to open to commissioner questions if there are any, although we do also have Mr. Kurt Wardman. We invited him as well. So if commissioners are okay, maybe we give Mr. Wardman a little bit of time to speak, or if they have questions, I also welcome them to come in, whatever, if anyone has anything they want to ask right now.
Commissioner Siddiqui, I think that's a pretty good idea to wait for Kurt to present too. Mr. Wardman, let me find you in here and make you a co-host so you can, or ask you to unmute. Okay.
Well, first of all, let me say it's good to be back. I once served on this body many, many years ago. And then probably my punishment after I retired is that the mayor appointed me to the Police Complaints Board. This is the ongoing DC government agency that adjudicates citizen complaints against police officers, which then further led to me to my latest endeavor. That was one of the 20 members of the DC Police Reform Commission. So, I mean, I'm very happy to hear of the interest in the report. It was a report assembled by a wide variety of DC citizens, I think from all walks of life, different perspectives. Clearly, it was called together in response to the incidents with the George Floyd murder and in Louisville and in far too many parts of this country. We're very much aware of that. On the other hand, we started with the understanding is the Metropolitan Police Department is not the Minneapolis Police Department, and we needed to review it based on what it is and not what is going on in police forces elsewhere in the country. And we took, I thought, an incredibly thorough look. I was incredibly impressed with my colleagues. We also called in a firm to help us with the research. So we had the advantage of not just the citizen participation and direction, but also actually having research staff so that they could follow up and see what other communities were doing and help us with drafting language, et cetera. We ended up with, I keep saying 55 because at the midpoint, that's where we were and it stuck in my head, but I think we ended up with 90 recommendations, which we've made to the city council. And, you know, we appreciate the support from other community organizations and even those that find it moderate, but I think this is the appropriate step to begin. And it's going to be experimental, and the council, the proposals will go to different committees and will have to be implemented in stages. And we fully expect that, you know, the council will have some experimentation with the proposals as they're implemented. But I think a couple of themes were overarching as the presentation mentioned. One is that, and we found this on the Police Complaints Board, we are burdening the Metropolitan Police Department with more and more duties. I know we had made proposals that the police be trained in this skill and that skill and other skills. And after a while, you realize is that our police officers just can't be professionals in 29 different fields. And for that sense, particularly, the one example, which I think is the best of mental health, is to begin to move those calls to mental health professionals to the degree possible. This doesn't mean sending out social workers into dangerous situations tomorrow morning and eliminating police protection or coordination with them. And it's going to have to be experimental. And I don't think anything's going to be done that where any social workers put in a position where they are uncomfortable with, but it's to start the process. Our police officers have training in dealing with the mentally ill, but that is not their profession, that is not their craft. And by in that one example, by moving it to those who that is their profession, that is their craft, we believe will solve a lot of problems. The other thing I will mention is that there are many initiatives of the Metropolitan Police Department and that have been controversial, and in many ways we didn't necessarily find conclusive proof that they're not, but we found the MPD didn't have data as to their programs that they were working or not. And I think that one of the throughout the report, you will find recommendations, not that the Metropolitan Police Department immediately terminate programs that they do, but that they assemble data and find out if this is working or if this is not working. And if the data proves it, you know, that is good, but they should be doing stuff based on that has been verified, that has been found to be productive, rather than just gut feelings. So, I think the earlier presentation was very good. and made it, outline a number of the recommendations that we have. And, I'll let them speak for themselves, but I'm also happy to answer questions if commissioners or members of the public have some.
Commissioners, do you have any questions for any of our presenters this evening?
I have one, Chair Finley, at the moment, if I may. But first, Imara and Rachel and Kurt, thank you all for being here this evening and sharing and making these presentations. Much appreciated, as I know by myself and probably many on this call this evening. Kurt, I wanted to ask you a question regarding those services where MPD is not collecting the data. And if I heard you correctly, you indicated that they have to either collect the data to see what's working or not. But I guess my question would be, for those that are not, do they even have the appropriate staffing to implement all of these programs that they haven't been collecting data on? So it's not, to me personally, whether or not it's working or not, it's if it's not working, is it staffing, is the staffing correct? Because this impacts reallocating funds. And so do you know if the staffing, have they reported out that while they haven't collected the data, that each of those social services or whatever services they're providing are being staffed accordingly? Do we know that?
Kurt, I think that would be for you.
We might have to unmute them again, Commissioner Finley.
Oh, sure. Can you help me with that too?
Yes.
What's that?
Okay, here I go.
Is that a fair question?
Yes, I think that's a fair question. And we may find in some instances that I think throughout our report, it is not just always a reduction in the duties of the MPD. It's various changes, some of which are an increase. And certainly they need to assemble the staff to collect data and to make sure these programs are appropriate. One of the operations of MPD is the post board, the Police Officer Standards and Training Board. And this is the board that reviews the standards and training of police officers. This hasn't met in years. It has a very important role, but it hasn't met in years. And we have asked the council's legislation, I think, improve the composition to the board, the post board. But if it doesn't meet, you don't achieve anything. But the other recommendation we made is that that they have dedicated staff at the Metropolitan Police Department. This would actually be an increase in funding, and you'd need increased resources at MPD in order to do that. So that as police officer standards and training methods are developed, is that the citizen board, which is very important, so we have citizen input, but that they also have professional staff that is dedicated to them to do their work. So, as this is implemented in some places, we're going to have to increase funding for MPD. In some places, there will be duties that will shift it elsewhere, and therefore it'll be the funding can follow those duties. But I think you're right, Commissioner Reba.
Chair Finley, if I may, I'd like to ask Imara and Rachel, where did you get that 50% defund? What was that based on?
I'll take that one, I guess, Rachel. So that is based on a really rigorous analysis done by, wow, there's several organizations. I know ACLU DC was involved, but a number of budgetarily focused organizations in our coalition did a real in-depth review of the police budget, and they could all provide you with for me, frankly, a little too complicated explanation of where we come up with that number and what specific things we would cut. A lot of that actually is also available on our website if you would like to check it out, and is much more detailed within our roadmap. But yeah, there are specific places that that we are demanding those cuts be made to compose the 50%.
I would ask,
Good question,
that, and maybe it's in the, thank you. I don't know if it's in the chat, but I'd love to get a copy of the link to the presentation, because on my screen, some of the slides were over, they were enlarged and I couldn't really make out everything that was on those screens. But thank you for answering that. I just hope that it wasn't a benchmark based on a country-wide figure, because everybody knows that DC is very unique in its jurisdiction in terms that we back up the White House, the Capitol, federal property, federal land, and we're really the the first responders to many that goes on here. Even in 9/11, we were the backup. But let me ask one last question, and I'll turn it over to my colleagues. And this is for Kurt, Rachel, and Imara. Has the coalition met with the commission? Has there been a presentation? Have you come together? I know Kurt said there were many things that you presented tonight is on their radar, but what are the dynamics between the commission and the coalition?
So I would just start by saying members of the coalition, members of the commission are actually on our coalition. So we haven't done a formal presentation to the commission writ large, but absolutely, not only did their research inform our road marks, our demands, our benchmarks rather, and our demands, but also I would like to say that some of our research was handed over rather freely for use.
Okay. Well, I know that a resolution is probably forthcoming within 3C moving forward. I hope that we're strategic and mindful as we proceed and when we proceed, but I'd really like to see some better collaboration or extended collaboration between yourselves and the commission, so we are supporting our family, our city, and we're supporting like minds and working towards a better policy and better reforms for all.
I think I would want to highlight, I mean, in the Police Reform Commission report itself, there's an acknowledgement that there's, substantial overlap, including with Defund MPD is named specifically. So there's sort of an acknowledgement that even though there might be a little bit of difference, I mean, there is difference, and there's, at the same time, there's an acknowledgement that there's an overlap, and that's sort of what we've brought to wanting to work in that area of overlap.
Okay, and again, I'm apologetic, but the only thing that concerns me is what our MPD colleague shared earlier, is that between retirements and cuts, they haven't been able to fill positions, and they're not going to be able to fill positions. And the shooting at John Eaton is just another example where those cuts could have prevented those officers being in the vicinity and responding timely and efficiently and providing the services that they do and provide each and every day. And that's the one thing that concerns me regarding that 50% cut. I understand the need to channel it towards health services and other areas that MPD cannot carry or where they're not experts, but I think we really need to be clear on what that figure is, because I'd hate for the ANC to support a 50% reduction if in fact it should be 45%. That's all.
I think that's really fair. I don't want to get too bogged down on this, but I think that's really fair. I actually came prepared to answer this question because it's a very common question that is raised whenever I have these talks around the city. I think there's a few things there. Earlier, Commander Bedlian noted that, the issue of current PD staffing, and said that, he doesn't think it's a coincidence that violent crime is up. Some of you may have heard this talking point very recently from Fox News. Violent crime is up across the country for a sea of different reasons, but certainly one of those being you know, a year of austerity politics in the face of a pandemic. I think part of the challenge here is in conflating two very different things. We all know, we have very clear data on what Metro DC Police Department, the MPD's budget is $500 million, $500 million a year. And clearly that has not addressed our issues. So I think it's very reasonable. We are, as a city, we are very responsible about deciding where budgets should be cut and where we should prioritize our community. We have not historically been super responsible about including the police budget within that sphere. And to be very frank, comments like those of Commander Bedlian are pretty habitual responses that drive fear amongst us, that drive us to resort to funding police over any other solution that we as a community might decide is necessary.
Well, I don't think any of us would argue that crime is up, particularly with shootings out in California, where people have been road raging with guns. And I mean, that's another conversation for another time, but I think we'd all agree that crime is up across the country.
Yeah, I would add to that crime is up in places that have cut their funding for police and in places that have increased it over the last year. There's no correlation with that. So that's just sort of going on to illustrate that point, that police are not the solution.
Yeah, did you, just in closing, and thank you for indulging me, but did anybody see the article regarding New York, Baltimore, Oakland, Los Angeles, and Minneapolis that are refunding the police? I just throw that out there. But thank you all. And Mara, Rachel, thank you so much. And Kurt, thank you so much. And thank you for forwarding the link. I really would like to see it and dig a little deeper. So again, thank you for being here this evening. Much appreciated.
Amara and Rachel, I've got a question for you. You know, not having the presentation on hand, and I can't wait to see it, you know, again. But all of the recommendations you make come out of the Police Reform Commission report, or most, or how would you characterize that?
Yeah. So in the slides, there was a heading for, you know, each slide. And then there were a couple of examples of solutions, and that heading and those solutions came directly from the PRC report. So again, those are sort of, we were picking one in particular that we wanted to highlight because they align really well with Defund MPD, and, you know, did point out where there's some differences, but there's a lot more recommendations that we didn't touch on at all.
Thank you. And one of the ones that jumped out, well, I did not mean that as a pun, but the, yes, jump outs are obviously a terrible policy, and I think MPD has admitted that they don't work, but they are terrifying to witnesses. They're terrifying to the people who are on the receiving end of them. And yeah, I fully support getting rid of jump outs. That's really good policy to get rid of permanently. Thank you. Fellow commissioners, do you have any other questions for our presenters?
I'd like to ask a question, if I could. This is Nancy McWood. Thank you to all three presenters. Really appreciate it. This was very helpful, interesting, and informative. I looked at the Police Reform Commission report and was frankly pretty overwhelmed. 90 recommendations is that's staggering, quite frankly, particularly when we're talking about a topic that is so critical to the functioning of the city, dovetails with all the initiatives that we are trying to pursue for social justice and racial equity, as well as violence prevention and control. So for one of the questions I have is, and partially this is for Kurt and partially this is for Amara and Rachel, did the commission provide a blueprint or a roadmap for what should be implemented when? Because you mentioned, Kurt, that the intent was that the recommendations would be implemented in stages, and then you use the language that some of the recommendations are experimental. For somebody like me, that sends fear through me pretty quickly. I mean, how do I explain this to my constituents that, oh, you know, we're going to do some experimental things and hope it all works out. On the other hand, Rachel mentioned that some things should end now. Like traffic stops and officers in schools, and I'm sure there are others. So, has the commission, or is there a meeting of the minds as to how this should unfold in a reasonable and responsible way?
I have some thoughts on that, but maybe lead the way, Kurt.
Let me just first of all relieve Nancy's anxiety. I think by experimental, I did not mean, you know, who knows, or maybe this will work, or let's stick our finger here, sort of like the way I try to fix my computer. But by experimental more is that we have a proposal, we believe in the merits of it, we've researched it, we've looked at it, but it should be implemented in stages, and as each stage is implemented, we fully expect that one would look at the results and make adjustments as necessary. I think maybe non-dogmatic would be the better term than experimental. So Nancy, I hope that makes you feel a little bit better. But I mean, this came up, we had a meeting with Council Member Che, and she asked the same question, what happens next? And the bad news for her is that this is really, you know, the council has a major role in this of implementing the various provisions. It's not something that can be, even if it was desired to be implemented, you know, all in one package. It'll go to various committees of the council. You know, some of it requires new programs in place and working. And I think by experimental, I mean just not that the program is launched, but it's allowed to, you know, get its grounding before the police department then recedes and focuses on its core mission. So it is going to be a long process. And I mean, I think we know in the political process is that I could probably sit down and sketch out what I think would be the stages of implementation. But, you know, you may have something that goes to one committee in the council and there's not a consensus, while in another committee there is consensus, but it really should be done in the opposite sequence. And that becomes a difficulty. What the solution is, that'll be for greater minds than me.
So I guess I would note that this was something we put a lot of thought into before this call tonight. This is something that we use to influence the selection of recommendations that we highlighted for you all. And actually, as you were saying, Ms. McWood, or Commissioner Wood, mea culpa, as you were noting, there are some of these things that which seem really obvious, you know, but I also wanted to really highlight the importance of capturing some of that low-hanging fruit immediately. So Commissioner Finley noted something that, I mean, it wouldn't be difficult and would be a brilliant place to start. And it's especially relevant tonight because this is the police vision of violence prevention, the police vision of specifically gun violence reduction, and that is jump outs. What's noteworthy is that we know they don't work. They know they don't work. They know that their implementation has been racist, and yet they haven't disappeared. So that's really, it's an easy first step to take as we search for solutions to make our community more safe.
Thank you.
Thank you all.
Commissioner McWood, do you have more questions? Commissioner McWood, you're muted.
I may, but I'd like to give other people an opportunity to talk.
Understandable. Thank you so much. Fellow commissioners, do you have any questions for our presenters this evening?
I'd like to ask a question.
Please do.
So first of all, I really enjoyed this presentation and I appreciate you all coming out and presenting it to us. I was just curious because there were areas of agreement that you highlighted, and that was very heartening to see. I wonder what both groups would say about the fact that, you know, many of these instances of police brutality are, I mean, for lack of a better way of saying it, committed by the same police officers. You know, police officers have had, you know, 13 and 15 complaints made against them. And I just wondered if that was mentioned in the commission report and where the agreement is or the thoughts of the two groups here tonight on that issue, whether or not, you know, and what the recommendation is for police departments to kind of police their own and maybe say, gee, these are the 20% of police officers that are getting all the violence complaints.
Yeah, I mean, I guess I would ask Kurt probably to step in on this, but the PRC report has a pretty extensive list of recommendations at a pretty detailed level for how to look at accountability. So yeah, Kurt, you can mention.
I would say, and I'm a little, I don't know if self-interested is the word, but since I serve on the the Civilian Police Complaints Board, it's police officers policing their own, I don't think is the appropriate remedy. And it's not what we have in the District of Columbia, which is a good thing. And that's one of the reasons why I don't think we've had some of the terrible instances that we've seen in other parts of the country. I mean, I don't know of any police officer in DC with 13 sustained complaints against him or her. The improvements, however, that we have asked for the Office of Police Complaints, the civilian body, is that currently we look at civilian allegations, complaints against an officer, and we investigate and make a determination, and we send a recommendation to the chief. Our report, those recommendations are not always accepted as to the type of discipline for that officer. The report would expand our authority to make it mandatory. The other thing is currently our authority is when a citizen complains about a police officer's action. We don't currently have the ability to investigate an anonymous complaint. So this would allow that. And then thirdly, in the course of making an investigation based on a citizen complaint, we may find other evidence of a misdeed by the same police officer or a different police officer. And this would expand the authority so the executive director of the Office of Police Complaints could pursue that investigation. So I think those improvements would expand the civilian oversight of police officers, and I think, you know, get to Commissioner Gerson, you know, I think where you want to go, hopefully.
Thank you.
It doesn't seem like there's much daylight of disagreement between these two groups this evening. Fellow commissioners, any other questions? All right, we'll move to questions from the public.
Oh, I just had one quick one.
Oh, sure.
When we talk about like increases in crime or all of that stuff, are we including like the increase in the police committing violent crimes against the shootings? Because I know sometimes that gets taken out of these statistics, and you're not seeing some of the increases that might be happening there. Okay.
So I guess I would say, and please feel free to correct me, Kurt and Rachel, I would note that data is really hard to capture consistently. Right. Certainly nationwide, but even here in DC, one of our constant challenges in advocating for this cause has been the lack of transparency and very frankly, the lack of responsiveness to public demands for information that we've gotten from Metro PD. To put it very politely, I would say that seems like a very reasonable first step to expect our government, our public servants to be responsive to the public when they ask for information on their enforcement of.
For the same statistics that they are reporting on the public from themselves. Yes, I agree. Kind of knew the answer to the question, so. But thank you for indulging.
Okay. I don't think we have questions for fellow commissioners, but they're always welcome to jump in later. Folks, if anybody in the public has questions, please click the reactions button, and then you'll see a little thing that says raise hand. You'll see a little palm, and you can click that. And once you've done so, we'll be able to call on you and ask you to unmute. And I hope that Commissioner Siddiqui can help me unmute folks as need be if anybody has questions. And I see a question from Chris Martin.
And I've asked Mr. Martin to unmute, so please go ahead.
Great, thank you. And thank you for the great presentation. I thought it was very constructive and very helpful. As many of the commissioners know, I live directly across the street from John Eaton Elementary. And I think our whole neighborhood is pretty shaken up by the events of last week. But to me, it reflects that there are neighborhoods across the city that are shaken up by these events. And I think there are a couple of points that have been discussed tonight that I just wanted to reinforce. And then I had a question as well for the panelists. Specifically, in terms of defunding the police, I work in property management, and I've been impressed by the level of empathy and respect that MPD has had for individuals experiencing homelessness or at-risk populations on the street. But their consistent feedback has been for more mental health support to be able to work better with those individuals. So I strongly encourage that aspect of ongoing funding and support for MPD. The second thing relative to that, though, is that in some geographies in the city, there are businesses have experienced crime, and the feedback from MPD has been that they just don't have sufficient officers to respond to the crime in a timely manner to address the crime. And so I would express concern about whether reducing the number of available officers or allocations of officers could allow that to continue to occur. The question that I had, though, is, and I'm not sure if this is for Kurt or Amara, but I'm fairly active in the education space in DC. And one of the big initiatives is to increase diversity of teachers to better reflect the diversity of the student population. And similarly to strive for better recruitment of diversity to be able to better serve the diversity of the city. And I was curious, just statistically, what is the diversity of MPD and what efforts are being made to be able to increase the diversity of MPD? Thank you.
So I guess I'll jump on this one. I think that's a great question, a question that we encounter a lot. And I would just respond really briefly to note that, police diversity is not the solution to police violence. MPD is one of the most diverse police forces in the nation. There's been a ton of research done on this. More cops of color does not equate more racial equity in policing. It just doesn't. Oh, and with regard to the concern about lack of sufficient officers to respond to crime, I think that that's a valid concern. There's a lot of room for discussion around that. I think that one thing that could help to address that issue is moving some things out of the hands of police. I don't think that, cities around the country actually have realized that you do not need a person with a gun to enforce traffic. That would maybe free them up to protect businesses.
Thank you.
I would just echo Amara's point. Our report, at no point does it say that there should be a reduction in the number of patrol officers in the situation that you described. What it does do is that it looks at various duties that currently are dumped on the MPD and suggests that there are other professionals who can better handle those duties, traffic being one, mental health being another. And then that frees up resources, either to both invest in those programs and without causing any reduction necessarily in the number of officers who would be available to respond to a police call.
Yeah, I would underscore that point by just noting that the amount of time that police spend on addressing violent crime is actually a really small percentage of their share of time, maybe around 4%. So there's a lot of room to make significant reductions in police responsibilities and funding while preserving a small amount of that.
Thank you. Fellow commissioners, folks who come out to this meeting tonight to hear these presentations, any more questions?
Can I kind of make a comment without advocating one side or the other to that last kind of run? With regards to like police responding to businesses and crimes, like it's one thing if, you know, the CVS is getting robbed by robbed of baby formula by a mother who needs it. We probably need to look into solving the other problem, why she feels like she needs to rob the store to get baby formula for. So there, I think there's some other, you know, beyond just being responsive, being proactive to some of the needs of some folks that might be committing these crimes, right? Big toolbox out there.
I agree with you, Commissioner Baggett. So are there any other comments or questions from commissioners or the public? Okay, well, thank you, Amara and Rachel, for your presentation, and thank you, Kurt, for joining. We really appreciate the healthy debate and all the information from you all this evening, and we look forward to hearing from you again. Thank you.
And thanks for the candor of your questions. That was really nice. It was a pleasant meeting tonight.
Yeah, thank you so much.
So next up on commission business, we have the secretary's report. We're moved through the commission business portion of the evening and now we're on to other business. So we'll start with the secretary's report. Secretary Reba.
Thank you. I sent out the minutes. I received a few responses and thank you for those that responded. If are there any more changes? Did everybody get to respond? Is everything okay? Okay, with that being said, I'd like to go ahead and move the minutes from May 17th meeting. Do I hear a second?
Second.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right. Any questions or comments about the minutes? All right, seeing none. All those in favor of approving the minutes as presented by Secretary Reba, please, well, let's see. I see, okay. Commissioner Reba, Commissioner Paggett, I see your hands up. Commissioner McWood?
Aye.
Aye. Commissioner Hoyt, Commissioner Kirsten. Commissioner Siddiqui, how do you vote?
Aye.
Commissioner Fink, how do you vote? Sorry, Commissioner Fink? He says thumbs up. Great. And I'm in favor. Passes unanimously. Thank you. Okay, and the treasurer's report, Commissioner Siddiqui.
It's been a little bit of a tough month, so I'm hoping everyone is okay if we skip the treasurer's report, and I will report with the second QFR in the next meeting as well.
Okay, thank you, Commissioner Siddiqui. We move to single member district reports. And Commissioner Reba, it's back to you. It's like a game of tennis now. Oh, hold on, Commissioner Reba, you're muted.
Okay, thank you. I'm not sure how that happened. First off, I want to thank Commissioner Fink for reporting out last month for me regarding the National Zoo. Last month my allergies were awful. I could barely speak for our May meeting. So I think I've made up for it tonight. With that being said, I don't know if everybody saw the article last week but it speaks to our affordable housing conversation this evening. And I just want to make a special note that if no one saw the report, Amazon and Metro announced a $125 million commitment to create 1,000 affordable housing units at Metro stations throughout the DC area. It's part of Amazon's $2 billion housing equity fund, which aims to preserve and create more than 20,000 affordable housing units in regions it calls home. Amazon and WMATA announced a goal to create more than 1,000 new affordable housing units at Metro stations throughout DC, Maryland, and Virginia. And that may be another option in terms of a private-public partnership that we could potentially support or stand behind. Amazon is committed to about 125 million in below market capital to expedite development of affordable homes so that moderate to low income families in the nation's capital and throughout the region can afford to live in the communities with easy access to employment, schools, healthcare, education, and other amenities. So I wanted to throw that out there, being that we had that discussion today in the event anybody missed out on that article last week. I also want to share that regarding the National Zoo, if nobody has heard, Dr. Steve Montfort is retiring from the Smithsonian to return to field work. This is something that he's very passionate about and has wanted to do for some time. And his last day will be August 31st. And Miss Brandy Smith, the deputy director, will be serving as the acting director for the National Zoo. I want to share that the old Starbucks location at 2649 Connecticut Avenue has been leased to Han Palace. That's H-A-N Palace. It's one of the top dim sum operators in the DMV, and they're currently waiting on their permitting from DCRA. The old Dunkin' Donuts location at 2633 Connecticut Avenue is still being negotiated. So I'm hoping for updates in July. And if everybody recalls, the owner of 2631 to 2641 Connecticut Avenue came before the ANC a few months ago to add a third story to the existing structure. This has finally been approved by HPRB. And now that the applicant has received this approval, they're going to proceed with designing the structure and mechanical penthouse. And the bids and the plans are out for bid at the moment. The landlord plans to officially take the third floor to market to start the leasing process after Labor Day when the office market is officially back this fall. Other than that, let me just check my notes real quick. I believe that concludes my SMD report. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Reba. Commissioner Fink, do you have an update for your SMD? Is Commissioner Fink still on? Yes, he is. Commissioner Fink, you're on mute. Now you're muted. You were unmuted. Okay. Commissioner Pagets, do you have an update for 3C03?
No.
Okay. Well, thank you. So I'll give a brief update for 3C04. The Washington gas work that was supposed to, I think, originally be completed by the end of June was postponed until the end of July. This is the replacing of pipes along Connecticut along the service lane and adding meters to businesses that previously had internal gas meters, which is not very safe. But the work is now expected to conclude in November. Washington Gas will be doing a walkthrough with Councilmember Che and several ANC commissioners, including myself, on June 28th to figure out what is taking Washington Gas so long and what is causing the delays. In addition, they had, some of you may be aware, at Porter in Connecticut, if you're heading eastbound on Porter, there are steel plates, and the amount of steel plates doubled, I think, last weekend when Washington Gas did not properly support the asphalt next to the steel plates, and there was subsidence, and the police had to show up and perform traffic duties and closed off eastbound on Porter from Connecticut. So that is what I have to report, and it's just a lot of Washington Gas issues, and hopefully we'll be able to get those addressed and figure out what's going on, why it's taking so long. So, Commissioner Siddiqui, 3C05.
Yeah, just quickly, because I do want to mention this. The Hearst Park and pool construction is going as badly as it always has. In fact, that it's now, apparently been delayed to end of July in August for openings, although even Councilmember Che expressed, real doubt that it's going to be completed by then. So she felt that she also felt like it's very hard to get through to understand what's going on, what's causing delays. She's reached out to the mayor about it as well. And I just report that I have been very powerless to do anything on that either, and makes me really angry, and I'm really angry for the residents who were always right about this project. So yeah, I just wanted to make sure that's recorded.
Thank you, Commissioner Siddiqui. Commissioner Hoyt, do you have an update from SMD06?
Nothing from me today.
Great, thank you so much. Commissioner Boucher is absent. Commissioner Gersten, do you have an update for 3C08?
Yes, just a quick one. So one of the neighborhoods in my SMD has been having a great deal of difficulty with mail delivery, such that, for example, people are not getting mail for 5 days. People are finding letters in the middle of the street. People are trying to mail letters and they're not being received by the recipient. So I initially worked with Councilmember Che's office. She pointed me in the direction of Eleanor Holmes Norton, who is now looking into this matter because it's a very vexing problem for the neighborhood. And that's all I have.
Thank you. And before I go to you, Commissioner McWood, Commissioner Fink noted in the chat that he has nothing to report for SMD02. Commissioner McWood, do you have anything to report from SMD09?
Yes,
Aside from
do.
what happened on Thursday.
Yeah, that's very, very, very unfortunate. And fortunately, all the construction workers are seem to be okay, with the exception of the man who was targeted. But I would urge anyone, if you're near the site, if you're walking around the site, a lot of the construction workers are out on the sidewalk. They're pretty accessible. Just ask them how they're doing, and that we appreciate all the work that they're doing. We actually have 2 shifts we've had since the end of May working at Eaton. So they're working from 7 a.m. to 9 p.m. on many days in order to try to get the project finished and open in time for school, which everyone is committed that will happen. I also wanted to mention that the reason I was at the site a couple of days prior to the shooting was that we've had sightings of rats in the block south of John Eaton, the whole square block. Practically every resident has contacted me. I made arrangements for the Department of Health inspectors to come out, and it's unusual because usually rats appear when a large construction site is being excavated. This occurrence happened when the project is practically finished, but apparently on the Lowell Street side, some additional excavation was occurring, and that is likely what happened. DOH, good news is DOH thinks that this can be fairly easily remedied because we don't have a lot of behaviors that encourage rats and allow them to remain, but they have provided some safe treatments on private property as long as the residents agreed. And so far everyone has, and they are coming back next week and going to do another loop around to see if the initial treatments worked and if any additional treatments are needed. So that's that report. I also wanted to report that I'm participating in a school parking working group that was organized by DDOT. The intention of the group is to help to inform the writing of regulations that would provide a scheme for teachers at DCPS schools and charter schools to park in the area around the schools where the schools do not have on-site parking. The intent is certainly not to encourage single car driving or single person vehicle driving, but there's an acknowledgement that there is in many cases on many of the campuses a need to provide some parking. And then the only other thing I wanted to mention was I never want to counter anything that Commissioner Reba says, but the Amazon investment in affordable housing is primarily in Virginia. As far as I know, there's no plans to invest at WMATA sites in the district. This came up at a meeting earlier this week where there was a WMATA representative, and she reported that she doesn't believe that there are any plans to do that. All of the sites that have been chosen for investment by Amazon are WMATA owned sites. Which makes it more problematic in the district. But at this point, maybe they will invest in metro sites in the district. But at this point, there apparently are no plans to do that. So that's it.
Thank you, Commissioner McWood. Perhaps we can get former Commissioner Hirsch to help with the rat summit if need be.
Yeah.
I'm sure she'd love to do it. Yeah. Anyhow,
Hopefully it'll be over before I ever have to make another report.
Yeah, I hope so too. So we've finished our SMD reports. Is there a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Thank you, Commissioner McWood. Is there a second?
Yep.
Second.
Thank you. All those in favor of adjourning, please say aye or raise your hand.
Aye.
Aye.
All right.
All of the above.
We've got a simple majority. It looks like it's a unanimous. Thank you all so much. Have a great rest of your month, and see you in July.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.